I got inspired recently by a visit to the Bauhaus School of Design, or Bauhaus Museum in Dessau, Rosslau, Germany, and how we can maybe apply it to our SSBD frameworks, for instance. So the flow of my talk is going to have three parts. I'm going to just introduce you to Bauhaus design and what that is. And then I'm going to talk about plastic chemicals in this circular economy, and then how we can design simpler plastics with Bauhaus chemistry. So first part is Bauhaus design. So this was founded with the Staatliches Bauhaus Design School, which was founded by Walter Gropius. And he had this design principle that an object is defined by its nature. In order then to design it to function correctly, a container, a chair, or a house, one must first of all study its nature, for it must serve its purpose perfectly. That is, it must fulfill its function usefully, be durable, economical, and beautiful. And just to give you some examples, this is some Bauhaus furniture, which was quite avant-garde at the time, but I think it's still fashionable today. And you can see some of these Bauhaus principles of being functional, but also using being economical, and that they used a minimum amount of materials that were quite easily available, steel and textiles. And a principle that they also used is something they called truth to materials. So the material should be used where it is most appropriate, and its nature should not be hidden. No hidden layers. You see what you see. So the steel is the steel, the ceramic is the ceramic, the cinder blocks are the cinder blocks, wood is the wood, and let's talk about, can the plastic be the plastic? So that will get me onto the topic of plastic chemicals and the circular economy, which was something I've been researching and thinking about for a long time, so just go into that. So this is a slide from about 7 years ago when my youngest was 1 year old. He's now 8, so this was some time. But when you're thinking about approaching how you're raising the next generation, you want to see if you can maybe raise them in a way that's mindful of circularity and the circular economy. And so if I wanted to, for instance, completely only get used things, reuse for my kid, I would go to, say, a market or something, and maybe I would find an old baby bottle. Great, I can clean that and wash at home. But as a chemist, I would have looked at the back, and I would have had that number 7 triangle. It's like, oh, this was made by polycarbonate, and I would have known at the time that this had the endocrine disruptor bisphenol A, which is not something I'd want to put. But this is just an example about how hazardous substances can prevent reuse. And we know that there's more chemicals than that. As part of the PlastChem project, we mapped out the hazards of the plastics that the chemicals that are associated with plastic additives, the manufacture of plastics, the non-intentionally added substances that can come in, for instance, through mechanical recycling. And we can also see like how people react to this. So I have a quote here from Aline Rotzetter, who's a hedge fund investor, or represents a hedge fund investing company, who wrote, "Additives are both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because they enhance the properties of the plastics, such as flexibility, processability, and resistance to environmental factors. However, they are also a curse, significant challenges for circularity and health." And I think it's a fair question when you see the evolution of, say, the plastics industry, like where did it start 60 years ago and where is it today? How did we come to this world we have now with so many plastics and multi-layer plastics and chemicals and plastics on the market? And there's diverse forces that just seem to have made some kind of a scope creep where we're adding like more functions to plastics than we need to. We have plastics bag that have more functions than a Swiss Army knife, but did they need to be designed for that? It was just a bag, you know? So we got chemicals used in plastics to advertise when they're not necessary. Color when the color serves no purpose for that function. We can make plastics arbitrarily resistant to extreme heats, even though they might never be exposed to such. So when you get these situations of over-complexity of materials in the product or over-complexity of chemicals in the plastics, they're not following these Bauhaus design principles of truth to materials and fulfilling their function perfectly. And just to tie this in to the circularity aspect, We know that recycling is stagnant at 9%, and while virgin plastic production, primarily from fossil fuels, is increasing. And there are serious limitations to how we can recycle, and some common methods are mechanical recycling, where the plastic is ground up, pelletized, and remolded. Chemical recycling, where it's either pyrolyzed or gasified to naphtha and then condensated. And it's something that I would not even really call chemical recycling. I think it's a misnomer. It's more of like an extraction approach, similar to fossil fuel extraction, and should be thought of as such. And there's also the solvent-based methods where you can use solvents to separate polymers from their additives. But we have to think about what will happen, of course, with the additives. Mechanical recycling will be recycled in the product. With chemical recycling, I heard anecdotally about a pilot chemical pyrolysis plant where accidentally fluoropolymers got in there, and that created so much hydrogen fluorine gas they had to completely destroy the pilot facility. So there's some type of plastics that are not compatible. You need extreme sorting. And what people don't talk enough about, I think, are the residues and condensates that are pretty much hazardous waste. In the solvent waste streams, you do have to treat the solvents and the waste streams. So one approach we try to integrate, like the toxic-free hierarchy with chemicals, and the traditional waste hierarchies is this toxic-free pollution minimization hierarchy, which, of course, as Romain said, prioritizes prevention at first, but then you can also introduce things like reduction, rethink, redesign, and this is where things like the Bauhaus principle can come up. And then below that, you have recycling and composting and anaerobic digestion, which to me is, at best, borderline circular economy thinking. So now to link these two together, designing simpler plastics with Bauhaus Chemistry, and I first want to make delineation just for simplification. We can differentiate between commodity plastics, which are high-volume, low-cost plastics, such as HDPE or PET, and then function material plastics that you might find like in electronics in your laptop. I do think there's more potential. We can apply Bauhaus design to both of them, but I think with commodity plastics, there's more of an opportunity to obey a truth of material if you have a very strict code about what commodity plastics are allowed to be produced and used for commodity purposes. These could be reusable and they could be mechanically recyclable, and you could have an opportunity for tracking how the mechanical recycling is working. They would be much better than, say, the functional material plastics, which do need additives for some kind of use. They might have a function like heat resistance. And there is some opportunities, such as with the EU's right to repair principle, which will be interesting to see how that rolls out. But they also have a very high chance of not even being relevant for the circular economy, and I think we should just make a clear differentiation. So just to bring that, the first principle of Bauhaus Chemistry, which we design only with commodity plastics that fulfill certain criteria. So it should be, for instance, capable of reuse, high mechanical recycling rates with good efficiency, and be truth to materials. So these would be pigment-free for easily sorting. They would have to have a negligible hazard substance content, and it would be a rethink of how we sort plastics. It wouldn't be all plastics in one bag. These would be very easily sorted. For instance, if all white plastics were HDPE, all clear plastics are PET, as an example. Easily sortable, not hard. The second is you have to integrate this into localized production and sorting material cycles. I'm saying the circular economy was supposed to bring us jobs. Why can't we bring back the milkman to bring us containers and get new ones? And to prevent the exportation of outside of any type of recycling or reuse, this should be designed locally. So, and only these types of commodity plastics would be picked up by this new type of Bauhaus milkman, if you will. And it would hopefully maybe stimulate local job creation. But to make this happen, you need to have strong local and regionally regulatory clarity to make sure that how these plastics are made, recycled, reused. And if you look at all the goals of the plastic and packaging and packaging waste regulation, the PPWR, all of these goals could be achieved by implementing these concepts of Bauhaus chemistry to some extent. We could have clear labeling, it could be very easily done, and all these ideas would be fully compatible. So just to sum up, The Bauhaus principles for commodity plastics would involve the unity of art and industrial production. It would have form, must strictly follow function, simplicity, utility, in the absence of unnecessary ornamentation, additives, pigments, be well designed, reusable, mechanically recyclable, and functional objects accessible to a broad consumer base. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and open for discussion of what you think of this concept.
Thank you so much for that very inspirational talk. Do we have some questions from the audience? I see Jane moving towards the microphone.
I was actually very curious about what her opinion is.
Thank you. Jane Monke from the Food Packaging Forum. Thanks for that talk. Really inspiring. I think I still have to reflect a little bit on it, but I mean, the elephant in the room always is the economics.
Yeah.
Plastics are so heavily subsidized right now. And now we're talking about extended producer responsibility, where taxpayers are expected now to also pay for dealing with the waste.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? And I know you're not an economist, but
No.
what are your thoughts on how we get a kind of not just truth in, what did you call it, truth in materials?
Yeah, truth in materials.
But also truth in the economics for the different materials. How do we get there?
That is a very good point. And yeah, I would like to go through the economics of it. I can just see, at least reflecting from a Scandinavian perspective, I know we have things kind of work with how we recycle PET bottles from an economic point of view, where we put a deposit and get money back. And we also have to put a fee to buying plastic bags. So the introduction of like somehow the consumer having to pay for part of this cost for the local redistribution could be put into play. But I mean, it should not only be put into that. I think I think there would need to be some also incentives just to encourage that these, say, for instance, local reuse and recycling strategies could be done locally. That would need to be done. And then, of course, the communication with the plastics industry would be, can we identify and agree and make a regulatory compliance and monitoring strategy for the plastics? So that would require these thoughts, but I do think there is potential to look at different carrots and sticks and economical grease, if you will. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I would love also to hear your views maybe on public perception and acceptance, but I think in the interest of time, I'll come back to you after the break.
Let's talk.
So we're going to move on now to the poster spotlight. So thank you again, Hans Peter.